So, Sandy, would you like to go next? I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, and Jules, as you know, I deeply, deeply love that Naomi Eliza Cohen article. I reference it all the time. Yeah,
I reference it all
and
the time.
yeah, so I love that, and then also I think one thing, in kind of separating out the analogy, actually, and looking at what's different with trans people, I think one
this is a train
particular
wreck. We gotta
area
look
that we
up
have to
this
think
person
about a
after
lot
this.
is well, we have to think of the children.
Yes, we have to think of the children.
In a way that we don't quite
Indeed.
have. I mean, I guess we do have to think of children in the case of the anti-Semitic example, in the blood libel kind of way. But that's
Is this person serious?
Even contemporary anti-Semitism. I mean, the QAnon is definitely doing some blood libel.
Yeah,
but
I want to know what the rest of that shirt says, Armani. I do.
Central focus, because a lot of it is more abstracted from that. But
this person is high.
With trans people, we really have to think of the
someone
children.
Go in their chat and ask them if this person is high?
In terms of a few things, right? In terms of how all of those children are getting their genders, right? How all those children are getting their genders and understanding their genders, and learning about the world of genders that exists. And capitalism really needs some specific genders to exist, and gets very stressed out when other ones start cropping up.
What the fuck?
And so that's a part of it. And that's one reason that you see it so, particularly focused in the U.S., particularly on schools, right? There's all the don't say gay type
oh my god,
type
this is so worth it. This is so worth it just for this alone.
And then also all of that segues into like labor control and labor discipline of teachers, right?
Can someone please go over to their chat and ask if Sandy
controlling
is high?
What teachers are allowed to say.
I can't do it. I can't get talk from their chat.
Using the transmisogynist or the transphobic broadly and homophobic grooming bogeyman, right?
Excellent work,
against teachers is very effective at like suppressing teachers unions, not least because it's very effective at suppressing gay teachers who are really good at organizing.
Why would suppressing teachers unions be really good at suppressing gay teachers who are really good at organizing? Why would those two things be correlated, Sandy?
Yeah. Great. I mean, there's a number of questions I think that are raised by that round of comments. And I mean, one of them is just about gender and capitalism. And I want to ask this in a couple different ways. And one is to follow up on Sandy's point about capitalism's reliance and dependence on a particular system of gender and its antipathy towards anything that threatens that. Sandy, you raised that in the course of your comments. I'd love to hear you say more about that and hear from Juliana and Kate as well. And another question that I have related to that is, to what extent? I mean, when we talk about fascism, oftentimes fascism is grounded in the petty bourgeoisie, right? In these kinds of like this precarious, not in the sense of being about to be homeless, right? Not in the sort of way we usually think about real precarity, but precarious in terms of constantly, they might lose their businesses, right? And sink into the proletariat, Kelleror. It seems to me that some of the hatred that is directed at children, right? Like it's presented as being directed at, quote unquote groomers or, this or that, right? But the most intimate, like most constant recipients of that hatred are children in the homes of these people. And I know there's some research, like I know there's been research done on Mumsnet, the British message board that helped kind of create a kind of
and what drugs
incubator for a lot of anti-trans sentiment, and sort of moderately affluent people are overrepresented, right, as contributors to Mumsnet, and so there's this like connection to the family, both as this site of capitalist reproduction, but also as
is a site of
way of performing a certain kind of middle class respectability that then your trans kid is messing up for you, right? And then this like class hostility that comes out in that way. So I have this kind of combined question, right, about this basically like capitalism and gender, but also not just big capital, but this kind of like anxiety about how do I perform this middle class respectability when my family doesn't perform gender in these socially prescribed ways. And so Sandy, I'll start with you if that's all right, or whoever wants to sort of get in first. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot to chew on there. And a couple of thoughts that I have,
philosophical,
and really sort of speaking to why capitalism needs these genders. But one part of it is that capitalism specifically needs to control these genders. And I actually want to do a little like orthodox Freudianism there a little bit, where what does it mean to to control and prescribe an identity, and particularly a gendered identity, right? Is about controlling. It's also about relationship to sexuality, right, and desire across similarity and difference, right, and through that, like, I mean, the classic Freudism point, right, about work is some concept.
It's okay, girl. We all like to talk about Freud when we're high as fuck on the internet.
And there's a lot that happens there, but there's another part of sort of prescribing these specific genders, right? But these specific genders that is about, it's about class, but as you're alluding to with Mumsnet, right? With the like the English petty bourgeoisie, right? In fact, the step in between class and gender really is race very heavily. And so to that regard, right, how do you reproduce class relations intergenerationally? You reproduce them as race, right? That has this biologically defined signifier class. And then how do you reproduce race intergenerationally? Is in fact very heavily through gender, right? And through the
how do you produce race intergenerationally,
the cultural differences and the differences in family organization between Black genders and white genders.
What?
Right?
There are Black and white genders now, guys. Breaking news. Black and white.
I think it's really
genders.
No coincidence that the places
no one ask any
in
questions.
the United States
what the fuck does
that
the
are
black and white gender
heavily
mean?
doing the anti-trans backlash right now, right, are Florida and Texas, which, as Cade loves to talk about, are both on the Gulf Coast, the most miscegenated part of the United States, right?
It says something like bottoms
The
and
part of the
tops
United
all
States
hate the
where the
cops or
white
something
people
like
are
that.
most have the most black ancestry. And it's difficult in those circumstances actually to
Autumn, you
preserve
can
race,
agree that this person is
which you have
high,
to do,
right?
because then how are we going to know
We
what
can at least
class
come
it
to
is?
some like
what class everyone
I mean,
is, right?
this is like
so,
obvious. This person is on drugs.
So
I wouldn't be
so the
judging, except that
reproduction
they're live
of
on the
these sort of
internet.
specific genders is very critical to that project, and it's also important with that to understand this, to take this sort of this step
Excellent,
beyond
Beth. Excellent. You're queering everything
feminism,
there.
as feminism is usually understood, right?
Beth has queered her identity.
To take this the step beyond that, to say that like white cis het women's genders are also very, very implicated.
What the fuck?
As part of both the system of control of queer people's genders and also of black people's genders and lives. And I said a lot of
this
things.
This stream is like fucking Christmas. Yes,
Gator
Philosophists,
Jules, you
we
want
can
to pick
see
up
that.
from me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. They pre-recorded this and still aired it.
I really like the one thing that that Cade worded in there was describing these sort of anti-scientific
I'm gonna work on that, Beth. Thank you.
Movements as scientistic, but not scientific.
Scientistic. What the fuck does that mean?
And I think, well, I say this one because I also think it's true that a lot of mainstream science, as it's understood, right, as certainly within like the academy, right, is scientistic but not scientific.
What does that mean?
My last comment, I outed myself as a relatively orthodox Freudian, and within the sciences, that's not taken especially seriously a great deal of the time. And
Otto, what does scientistic mean? Is this a socialist word?
In exactly the relationship of science and scientism, being scientific, seeming scientific versus actually being scientific. I think it's also, I mean, we're talking a lot about teachers, librarians. We also have to talk about like actual doctors, right? And sort of the
oh god,
Sandy
I'm downloading this
Stone
stream
point,
right after this.
right? The Sandy Stone point's about like Sandy Stone point's about trans people getting access to hormones and surgeries.
Thank you, Jenny.
By figuring out what they need to tell the doctors, to convince those doctors, that I'm the right candidate, right? I fit your scientific criteria. And I think
I'm gonna make a clip video after this called "Marxists on
that you
Drugs."
see with far right anti-scientific conspiracism is they're in certain ways like right to look at these institutions of knowledge and authority and say,
really?
hey, that's not scientific. You're full of it, right? Right? I agree with people who mistrust doctors, right?
Scientistic is a word often used to refer to a way of relating to
I
science
agree with
because
people who
lip service
mistrust
is an idea
doctors
being
and
scientific without really being scientific at all.
And certainly people, I have plenty of
They're
mistrust
trying
of
to
a
pretend
certain
that scientific
kind
is
of
not a made up fucking word
education.
because someone's high.
Although I love learning.
They love
And
learning though, guys.
within that, like, it's easy to see how without like, or I can see the shape of how without an alternative
Thank you,
to that,
James
right?
Jones.
Without an alternative science that is actually scientific, and without well, I guess what I'm saying is it's like
I'll just
the
say,
thing
Sandy,
that
I hate to, I don't want to cut
Yeah.
you off. I just want
She's
to
like,
mention
we're
that
rating this shit back in, bro.
I want to make sure that Juliana gets in, and I have one last question I want to ask everyone.
Yes, amazing.
So yeah, but please, by all means, finish
Yeah,
your statement.
The comment in the chat
I'm
about
sounding off a little, but
this woman right here, this black woman, Vanessa.
I'm saying that the
Vanessa
thing
is
that
trying to
we're
justify
doing
this
is
bullshit.
we are doing science better than the scientific authorities. And
we're doing
I'm
science
not
better
quite,
than the scientists.
Here, Jules, help me out. Help me out. Take my point home.
Yeah, why not? Okay.
So one thing I'll say, once upon a time, the nightlife, the underground, was much more underground than it is now. And it is still pretty underground, but it used to be further under. And also, there were a lot fewer trans people, and there was a much narrower range of jobs that those trans people were doing, mainly sex work, right? Very, very heavily sex work. And within that, you need photographers in that ecosystem to take pictures of you for your hooker ads, right? And then instead of why are there
Sandy
so
is the
many
gift that
more
keeps
trans
on
people
giving.
working the other way around? There are so many more trans people. Then what? All of a sudden, it becomes like kind of almost possible to imagine like making a living out of trans cultural production within a trans scene for a trans audience.
Like you're grifting?
And then you need an Instagram.
Like you're grifting? Like you're just doing it to get famous on the internet
pictures of you there.
and to get social media attention, Sandy? Tell us more. Tell us more, girl.
Also part of it's also a very important part of like a labor ecosystem of trans cultural production. And so within that, then, it kind of points to like, well, to do that, right? To do that well, right? To take those pictures well, you need to be doing the recognition, right? And it is so, yeah, you need to be doing the recognition. And so there's no way out of doing the recognition. And that's kind of the joy of it, right? That's the gravedigger, right? Is that like the labor conditions of like, I'm trying to play these gigs. Hopefully I might pay my rent with them in some capacity, right? Because I have all this dead labor and making me a really good musician. I need trans community recognition, and trans community needs to recognize me because they need music, right? They need all this different kind of artistic production. And I think there's so much rich horizon in there, and
the trans community needs
organizational possibility.
Okay,
I love that, and I love ending on a note of the creativity and the new possibilities for human expression that are opened up by actually having a community
at George Washington University.
I'm sorry.